everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ladies in Red. Phoebe here with Sydney and Kristen, and we are excited for this episode. We're going to really dig into and dive deep into how female athletes and women are portrayed in the media amongst sports via sports coverage and all that good stuff. So to start us off, we have an update. Women's sports kind of went hand in hand with what we're going to talk about today. We've mentioned her in past episodes, but Kim Ng is the first woman and second Asian American MLB general manager. And she recently did an interview with Today's Show, which really dug into kind of her experiences and how she got to the point she is at now. And she had mentioned that she thought she might have been brought into various interviews almost for appearances and was concerned if she was a serious candidate. But then there were other people interviewed and they definitely reassured that she has a ample amount of experience and a long resume and such, that she was very rightful for the job. But it was interesting, her perspective from my point of view, that she said regardless if she was brought in for appearances or if she had all the qualifications, either way, her name was getting out there. So that was really, really cool to see her perspective on that.
Yeah, I think this is going to tie really great into what we're going to talk about later in the episode about how women are portrayed in the media, because I think the media and just higher ups in the sports industry kind of go hand in hand with their decisions to, hire women in the industry or give women more opportunities. So I think this ties really well with what we'll discuss later.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's also just like a stepping stone for the professional sports world, especially because she's stepping into such a large role. And I think that like once one team hires a female to take on a position like being the general manager, that more and more teams will start to do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And we've talked about it plenty of times before, that just getting that visual of seeing women in those higher positions gives the hope and inspiration to the younger girls and for the next generations and such. But it's really interesting to kind of dive into why is there such unequal representation and such unequal coverage. And I think it kind of stems from just the stereotypes over the past century of women not supposed to be playing sports. I know we talked about it in our Women's History Month episode, that it really wasn't a thing. It was very male dominated, as we know, and it's really becoming something that is striving to be more equal. But unfortunately, we have that that stereotype that kind of lives on in small increments, and it's just interesting to see where that stems from. Specifically, I looked at something and it talked about the Olympics and how the Olympics in 2018, the women athletes made up 38% of the whole, and in 2020 they were projected to be 49%. So that is more than a 10% increase, which is huge. And that's definitely seeing the trends. And obviously 49% is very, very close to equal. So it's really cool to see that in the Olympics because everyone tunes into that. But then there comes other things with that, because the Olympics does include all of the sports and it is something everybody watches.
Yeah, I think this all ties into, raising girls in the sports industry. And I know that girls drop out of sports 2 times the rate of boys because, it's underpromoted or underfunded. And I think that's the reason why they're less represented at older ages, or women are expected to, meet someone, marry them, and have babies. I think that's like another big stereotype that draws women away from sports. But then you see people like Alex Morgan, who just had a baby and is now training and getting ready to be on the women's national soccer team again. So I think even though there is the existence of Title IX, which guarantees equal female participation in sports, some of its objectives are still yet to be fulfilled. And I think a lot of that stems from, women or young girls dropping out and choosing not to participate because of these stereotypes that still exist.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that women make up 40% of the athletes, and it's interesting to see that because that's almost 50%, obviously, very close to it, but only 4% of those 40% of women are getting coverage, which obviously affects sponsors, fans, promotions, stuff like that. And also just for the younger generations to have someone to look up to, having less professional female athletes involved and being represented is just harder for younger people to get involved because they have less people to look up to in a weird way.
Yeah, and it's not the lack of participation in sports, like we said with Title IX, like that really amped up the amount of sports being available to girls, meaning that if there was a male sport, there'd be a female sport counterpart or something to equal it out in various institutions and organizations. But it's the fact that the media, with the coverage, like that's a crazy stat for me. I remember when I looked that up the other day, I was like, wow, they're like only 4% of the coverage is women's sports. Like that is extremely low. And it kind of adds on that, like maybe makes you think like maybe that's why like Sid said, the dropout rate is more than for boys, and it's not of lack of passion or lack of ability to do anything. It's just maybe that confidence or that aspiration that it's sad to see that kind of you're going to be, for example, a professional soccer player, the males get paid more than the women do. So maybe that kind of it's due to underfunding and underpromotion and less coverage that maybe that kind of makes girls think, oh, like I can't do that or I shouldn't do that for my livelihood, when in all reality, everyone's doing the same amount of training, whether you're male or female. So it definitely is very eye-opening.
Yeah, I think, as Phoebe said, this does affect, this lack of coverage does affect like fans' excitement for the team that, or the women's team that they want to support or that they should support. I mean, I think Kristen can kind of attest to this really well, just because she played in a Centennial Conference Championship and won. And I think that's a big thing. Any other male team on campus, I feel like there would have been bigger support, but there's always going to be less support with women if they're underrepresented or have less coverage or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. Like I noticed that throughout like the conference tournament, we didn't have as much coverage, which I think is obviously like improving now with like us helping out on RDSN and stuff like that too. It's just like a new insight. But yeah, it would be interesting to see like how it would be if it were to be the contrary, or like even if it was to be a home game, because I know we were at Haverford, like 2 hours away from here. So that obviously probably affects it. But yeah, it's like an interesting thing to look at for sure, I think.
Yeah, and I think it almost stems from like a subconscious, like obviously we're really promoting women's sports and making strides. We talk about all the organizations that are encouraging young girls to play, things that we take part in as well, on Dickinson with the girls in the community, that there's so much effort into it that there definitely is that participation and that want for women to play sports. I think we've made a lot of progress with that, but it's that weird subconscious that has been drilled into like human society's minds because of like centuries ago when women just like weren't supposed to do this. So we're slowly getting away from that, but for some reason there's still that like innate thought, even though we don't really realize it and we're consciously doing all these things. It's just that when you're choosing to pick a men's sport or a women's sport, like basketball, for example, men's basketball, the NBA gets ton more views than the WNBA. And like, it's interesting, like why is that? It's like, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think like what you were saying, Phoebe, about viewers and fans, like a lot of that stems from, like if they have less viewers or less fans, they're going to get less money, which means these players are going to get paid less than men, which obviously isn't fair, but it stems from that. And I think it's just a societal problem rather than, like a corporation problem. It's not the MLB's fault that people don't want to watch softball or whatever, but I think it is a societal problem as a whole. And I think it's going to take more than just, female athletes to stand up. It's going to take everybody of all ages, of all genders to make both gender sports teams more acknowledged in the industry everywhere.
Yeah, and I think like kind of talking about like the salary whole issue with that, I know like baseball players, for softball anyway, baseball players have like $1 million contracts for X amount of years, but softball players, I know they only get like a couple $1,000s every couple of months. So I think that also affects how much female athletes want to like put in an effort, because I feel like a lot of times they're like, oh, well, I'm never going to go professional or I'm never going to play professional. But like with male sports, they have a greater opportunity to do so just because they're more recognized. And again, like I think it's interesting to see how you could probably find someone to name every or a ton of baseball players, as many as they could, football players, whatever, basketball. But then I feel like if you were to ask like, oh, like what are some female athletes, like it would be a lot harder to talk about because nobody really like, not that no one knows them, but they're just less talked about.
Yeah. And I think it's a snowball effect too. Like you said, the different wages that they get, even to use the example of baseball, softball, that baseball, they're making all that money. So they're able to do those promotions and be in the press and be everywhere as baseball all forward. Whereas those softball girls might have to have another job on the side. They are doing other things to get that income because they're not getting the same income. So they are dividing their energy amongst many things, which I'm all for multitasking and all of that. But it's then the effect in society that when people see them, they're not only seeing them as softball players, they're seeing them as the other things that they're doing and the other things they're participating in to in order to kind of get that income that would even just level out the playing field a little bit in that sense. So it's just a snowball effect that one thing leads to another, and then it all just ends up being kind of unequal representation. And yeah.
All right, now it's time for our spoon sponsorship. Why cut your portions down? When you're hungry, you want something that is filling and delicious, right? Well, Spoon's Cafe believes in cutting the chemicals, not the portions. Located at 57 West Pomfret Street in downtown Carlisle, Spoon's offers great sandwiches, salads, and soups that are tasty and good for you and will fill you right up. Stop cutting down the size of your lunch and instead get a delicious filling lunch today at Spoon's Cafe. Open 6 days a week, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Spoon's is the perfect spot to enjoy a great tasting lunch today.
All right. So as we discussed earlier, the reasoning or maybe the cause for the effect of the lack of sports media coverage doesn't come from the lack of participation, although it's still a little skewed of women versus men playing sports. It's getting up there to be very equal, up in those percentages. But the fact that 4% of sports coverage are for women's sports, that is something that is very appalling and something that clearly needs change and is very skewed one way. And sports coverage is just so powerful in shaping norms and stereotypes. And we talked about society earlier, that like what we see on TV, like think about growing up, like watching baseball, football, hockey, like all those things. Like we grew up thinking that, not thinking that, but like subconsciously, like, oh, like the men are playing the professional sports, like they're at the highest level, all that stuff. When in reality, there's women counterparts out there, they're just not being seen on TV. So I think that it's, in order for change, media really has to challenge these norms of what the media is showing and really try to even that playing field in order to kind of show that equal representation on the screen.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times women athletes in the media are represented as women first and athletes second. And a great example of this is, after a woman wins a game, they're asked, oh, well, what is your uniform, or what are you wearing? Or, like just about their appearance rather than their athletic ability. Whereas like men are depicted as powerful, dominating and valued as athletes and are valued by their playing rather than like their appearance. And I think that's a big issue in the media. And I can't think of like a specific athlete or example, but it's definitely apparent in every female interview.
Yeah. And I know, like, I don't know, just like a personal thing, like I want to definitely get into like the sports industry once I graduate. And I think like that's just like something that I could be like, oh yeah, I want to like challenge the norm and step into something that we've talked about, like is mostly dominated by male figures. And yeah, obviously there'll probably be a lot of my coworkers, but I think it'll be an interesting thing to look at. And I do feel like there are more and more females who want to step into these roles, which is really good, obviously.
Yeah, and back to just the double standard almost of those post-game interviews or just interviews in general. I remember, I also can't think of any specifics, but just the types of questions that they ask are very different. With women, they'll typically ask about their family or maybe what their healthy lifestyle is, maybe what they're eating, like stuff like that, that when you like say it out loud, it seems very like, I can't believe that they're doing that. Like it's so obvious that it's the two standards. Like you would never see an interview of a football player after the game and being like, oh, what did you have for lunch today? Like, what was your go-to before game? Like, they're never going to ask that, but you often might see that with women. And it's just crazy to think about that. Like, it really does have such an impact because as the viewers, which are the majority of society, they're seeing this, and whether it's conscious or not, it's in their minds that they're retaining all of this and consuming it. And then that's kind of what they are seeing as society and what's the truth and what's the norm and stuff like that. So I think it really lies in kind of changing that and making sure we are equally representing through the media, whether it's with questions or interviewing people or even just simply broadcasting the games. It's very hard to find a women's sports game on the television. You can't just turn on ESPN and have it at all times like we do with male sports. So I think that now that female sports are really gaining a lot of momentum, we need to kind of push for the media to change their outlook because they've been doing it for so long. So they don't want to change it, but it needs to be changed.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm thinking like Tom Brady's probably never been asked what he's wearing after his football game or after winning a Super Bowl, but someone like Naomi Osaka is probably asked questions about her family or, whatever. So I think a lot of that does stem from, like Phoebe said, the media, and it's the media's responsibility to be, obviously they're a very powerful source, but to be more powerful in reshaping these norms and stereotypes. And I think that's super important, as well as, female broadcasters. We talked about ESPNW, which is a source through ESPN that is just specifically for women. And I think that's really awesome, but I think you don't necessarily need a separate source to make women more equal in society. You can put women's athletic success on actual ESPN, which they do, but I think the whole separate side isn't necessary. I think it should just be an equal portrayal, and there should be more action like in Title IX to put females in those roles as broadcasters or sports journalists.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and in a way, like having a separate platform for them, like, yeah, it's beneficial, it's good, but how many people are going to go like to that separately, whereas they would just put on like ESPN instead and watch that, or like, I don't know, NBC Sports, stuff like that. So I think it's important for the transformation to kind of start with the ESPNW, but then eventually move like everything onto one platform, so it creates that equality, like you said, Sid.
Yeah, I agree. And when researching this, looking at the different media outlets, like it seems like a lot of them have like their version of ESPNW with like the female counterpart, and like they broadcast all that. And like you said, Chris, like it's really good to have that and be able to go to that source for like everything women's sports. But it also, I personally don't think it should be like a separate. I think that like you should go to like ESPN and then like the first thing you see is like men, female. Like if you want to divide it like that, you know what I mean? That it's equal. It kind of seems like it's like men's sports, then like the sidekick is like, oh, here's all the women's sports all together. But I agree, it should be at one spot. It shouldn't kind of be the sidekick that, oh yeah, we have it here, don't worry, it's all here, because it's not equal. And even it's crazy to think about ESPNW was just created in 2010, which wasn't that long ago. So it took them that long to kind of figure out that they needed to have more representation. And then even when you go on the ESPN page, it's like all the way at the bottom. It's like hard to find. It's not really an easy direct. So I agree. It should all be at the same place. It should just be equal. And obviously it's kind of hard with broadcasting and stuff if games happen at the same time or whatnot, but somehow they figured to work that out with all of men's sports across the board for however long now, with various sports happening all year long. So I think maybe having the channels is fine, but when you go to like the website and the sports coverage, and I don't know, when you turn on ESPN and they're talking about sports news, you want to hear about women too there. You don't want to have to change it to the women's version, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think platforms such as, ESPNW are good just by creating like empowering ads and just, like to empower women and creating that sense of community within women in the sports industry. And I know that Adidas started a global initiative called She Breaks Barriers, which, provided better access to sports for women and girls. And, they tried to remove these gender stereotypes and create like greater visibility for female athletes at all levels. And I think that, this is also a good initiative to put out those empowering ads and to make change seem tangible in the sports industry for women.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to like actually kind of create action rather than just kind of talking about it or like promoting it on social media, which yes, I think is like very beneficial, but I think to actually have something done is more impactful. And Jen Welter, the first female coach in the NFL, I think we've talked about her in the past. She created the first women's football cleats, which is cool because it's just again showing that like, yeah, like in a weird way, the cleats are really symbolic of we can do it too. Like I get like we could play football, like a Sarah Fuller, like she's a kicker, stuff like that. But yeah, it's just interesting to see how like they're kind of coming to a change where the use of like hashtags and stuff like that are kind of becoming something more like tangible, like we said, rather than just talked about.
Yeah. And I think that we see ever more in the past maybe decade, just like the increase in seeing females through these ads, through these hashtags with various companies like Nike, Adidas. Like, I feel like they're using women to show, like, yes, like women play sports too and stuff like that. But it's that tangible aspect that they can promote as much as they can. And obviously, it's super inspiring and empowering. And like we said, for young girls to see that is really awesome. But in the end, you need that tangible, like, you need what is the action? You need to be able to watch the games. You be able to turn the show on and be able to easily find it, not have to subscribe to something or look online or all this stuff. It's so easy when the MLB is playing, turn on the TV and there's 4 channels right there that are broadcasting it. So it's those like big actions that hopefully all of these hashtags and promotions and kind of movements are maybe going to push the media a little bit, because I think in personal experience, like I've seen women definitely in like advertisements a lot more than growing up, like sports advertisements for like athletic clothes and stuff. But for me, also like scrolling through the TV, if I like clicking through, like I don't often see like women's sports games, like maybe a WNBA here and there, but it's just not as prevalent as the male sports.
Yeah, I know for me, like my family only really gets like main channels. We don't get like every single ESPN channel. So it's not hard to find a women's sporting event on, like there's always women's sporting events being live streamed, and we might not get every channel, but we probably have 3 channels that you can watch sports on at home. And I think that out of all of those, at least 1 or 2 could be like they could stream a women's sporting game or whatever. I think it just comes down to like we said, media coverage and just giving them more of like coverage and give viewers an opportunity to see this and get excited about a women's sports game. And I think that goes hand in hand, that it's also not hard to find a women's sporting event to attend, either if it's college or professional, they're held almost every day or all the days that male sports would be held on. So I think that's just something to think about as, if you're avid with the sports industry and really, just want to attend a game, like think about that women play as much as men do as well.
Yeah, I think that we just don't hear about it as much because of the lack of media coverage and stuff like on TV. Like the normal person, like you said, like if you're very adamant in the sports world, like you would know to look up stuff and it's very easy to find it through the internet. But if you're an everyday person kind of watching the news, you're going to know that there is a Phillies game on tonight, but you might not know that the women's soccer team is also playing because they kind of leave that part out. And I think it's interesting that it kind of stems from like that, like innate, like why do we place men's sports higher than women's? Like, is it just because they've been playing longer? But like, we're really starting to prove ourselves now that I feel that we're getting to the point we're really earning that spot that we've proved that female, male doesn't matter. So we just have to get over that boundary in the media and really push for that equal coverage.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how like the ESPNW, which was created in 2010, is found at the bottom of the ESPN page, whereas like they could put it at the top as like its own separate tab, just to again like make it easier for people to get to, I guess, rather than just like having to look it up if they don't want to do that or they're already on the ESPN page. So if you see like a tab at the top, I feel like you're more inclined to click on it rather than it being at the bottom of the page and like the smaller text and stuff like that. But I think also with this, men's sports are covered by more well-established journalists. Like if you look on TV, like you could probably recognize a broadcaster who's interviewing a football player after like the Super Bowl or something like that. Whereas like women's coverage might be given to someone in an entry level position, or even an intern as like a stepping stone, kind of just like get their feet wet, learn the position in a way. Cause I feel like female athletes also receive poor quality of things like technical production and just like, again, less overall coverage, which has like created a problem in this like difference between male coverage and female coverage.
Yeah, I think what Kristen said just made me think of that. A lot of the times, if there are female like broadcasters on the side of a sports game or whatever, like they're all like really dressed up, dolled up, like hair done, makeup, like their faces beat with makeup, like you know what I mean. And I think that's really telling that the reason why they're probably on the sidelines of these games and are, reporting is probably because like people think they look good, so that's why they're going to put a female reporting on a male game. And I think that's obviously another issue. Like that type of media coverage is still a societal barrier that we have to break through. Just because women are good looking or their appearance is satisfying to viewers doesn't mean that they should have to be that way to belong in positions like that. And I think that's a big female gender stereotype.
Yeah, I agree. And it's definitely, we've seen progress with women getting into broadcasting and starting taking these roles. We've talked about it plenty of times, but it's the fact that it's not just that, it's also the work that they're giving. Like you mentioned, said like these females, they're making a point to be in the broadcasting, but they're covering the male games because you said like for various reasons. But it's like, why is it that we put kind of like a higher, I don't know, importance or like level to the male sports? Like, why is it that if you're an internet or news article, they might be like, oh yeah, go cover that professional softball game. And then once you master that, you move up. Like it should be the same. We're covering the same level of sports. You should be asking the same questions and holding yourself at the same professionalism. So it's definitely frustrating to see those numbers and to see that, because it doesn't really make sense. Like when you think about it and when you put it down on paper, that there shouldn't be any differences. And it's just these societal norms have just like created a tunnel vision that we really have to work as a community to stray from that, because it's really hard to get out of that one route.
Yeah, I think thinking about this, I think RDSN has done a really great job with not falling into these societal norms that women should be like, I don't know, like not in that position in the sports industry. I think we, like when someone's broadcasting on the sideline of a game, I think it's either like a boy or a girl. It's not always one. I think it's pretty equal. And I think that obviously it is a college, so it might be a little different than like the professional world, but I think RDSN has done a really good job of equal representation on our media through posts, not just posting just one team. I think they have done a really good job of trying to make it equal, which is really awesome to see. And it is telling that it's not hard to do that. Dickinson Athletics posts multiple times a day. So just like any other sports source. So I think it's really telling that it is possible and that these sources can give the equal amount of coverage to females and that it won't compromise viewers or money or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, like you said, RDSN is like kind of helping to break that norm here. Cause I mean, Justin has asked me, I think it was like last fall or like junior year fall 2019 to help broadcast a football game. And like I wasn't here that weekend, so I wasn't able to do it, but still like I was like, oh, okay, like yeah, like if I was to be here, like I would totally do it. So it's like an equal opportunity for everybody, and kind of can just like step into whatever role we want and try different things to see what we like, which I think is a really unique thing. We're not really assigned to anything super specific. So it's nice to be able to have that opportunity to learn the various parts of like the sports industry rather than being told what to do, kind of.
Yeah, and it definitely has to start small. Like we said, like starting in our little sports network here at Dickinson, and then to just grow to be something bigger. And just like I said before, we just have to kind of change that norm. Like, imagine if we were growing up and we were seeing the baseball games equally as the softball games, or we were seeing both men and women's soccer and seeing it on the news. Like, that stuff growing up like has such an impact of what you see and hear and stuff, and it really molds like your mindset of like what society is. So I think that as generations go, I hope to see a change, because we are going to start raising our children and their children and whatever to have a different mindset than decades before us. So that was awesome conversation. Definitely hit a lot of really key points that we want to see change, want to kind of see progress in. And I hope you guys enjoyed our little chat, and we are really excited to tune in next week. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon.